A young farmer was sleeping in an old grain sack when a storm brought a golden seed that changed his destiny forever. In the midst of extreme poverty, he planted that seed with faith and saw a miraculous plant emerge that transformed his life. From destitute to benefactor, his story proves that God acts in the most unlikely moments. Prepare for a journey of faith and miracles that will touch your heart. Subscribe, leave your like, and comment where you're watching from. In the small village of Harmony Creek, where the sun beat down on the land with the same intensity with which hope abandoned hearts, lived a young farmer whose name echoed like a sigh among the inhabitants. John. At 28 years old, his existence was summed up by a relentless cycle of deprivation. He didn't own a bed worthy of the name. He slept rolled up in an old grain sack, the kind the more well-off discarded without a second thought. His fingers, calloused and marked by premature time, knew only the weight of the hoe and the sting of blisters that never fully healed. The shack where he lived, if you could even call that mud and straw structure that seemed to bend under the weight of adversity a home, had only one room, where the wind entered without asking permission through the cracks in the imperfect walls. Beside it, like an extension of his own stubbornness, John maintained a modest garden, a small rectangle of green hope amidst the surrounding aridity. It was there, in that patch of land, that he deposited not only seeds, but also fragments of his never-realized dreams. His only companion on that journey of solitude was Jasper, an old and stubborn donkey, whose large, dark eyes seemed to carry more wisdom than many men in the village. Together, they formed an unlikely pair, a man who refused to abandon his land, and an animal who refused to abandon his owner. What was most impressive about that young man was not the misery that enveloped him like a heavy cloak, but rather the three virtues he carried like invisible treasures: a faith that remained unshakable even when heaven seemed deaf to his prayers, a generosity that made him share the little he had with those who had even less, and a perseverance that made the stones on the path seem like mere grains of sand under his determined feet. However, behind that gentle smile he offered to everyone he met, hid a conflict that grew like a weed in his chest. Should he remain on that land that once belonged to his ancestors, where every grain of sand told a family story? Or should he leave in search of a better life, as so many other young people had already done? This question accompanied him during sleepless nights, as he stared at the stars through the cracks in the precarious roof. One autumn morning, while harvesting the few vegetables that had survived the drought to sell at the market in the next town, John noticed a sudden change in the air. The wind, which had been just a gentle breeze, began to gain strength, bringing with it a premonition of a storm. On the horizon, a yellowish cloud advanced like a relentless army. "Dust storm," he whispered to himself, feeling his heart quicken. In a matter of minutes, the sky, previously an intense blue, transformed into an opaque and threatening curtain. The other villagers, noticing the imminent danger, ran to take shelter in their homes, closing doors and windows against the approaching fury. Shouts of warning echoed everywhere. "The storm is coming. Get inside." John, however, remained motionless, contemplating his small garden. Those plants were his only source of sustenance. If they were destroyed, what would become of him in the coming days? In a desperate impulse, he knelt down on the earth and began to cover the most fragile plants with his own body, like a mother protecting her children from danger. "Get inside, boy, you'll die out there," shouted a neighbor as he ran to his house. But John didn't hear. Or perhaps he heard but had already decided that some things were worth the risk. When the storm finally hit him, he felt thousands of invisible needles piercing his exposed skin. Sand got into his eyes, his nostrils, his mouth, but he did not abandon his position. The world became a golden, noisy chaos. The wind howled like a hungry beast, and the sand seemed to dance a frantic and destructive dance. How long did that fury last? Minutes? Hours? Time lost its meaning in that whirlwind that seemed to want to rip everything from the face of the earth. When the storm finally passed, leaving behind only a silence heavy with dust, John slowly rose. His eyes burned and his entire body seemed covered by a second skin made of sand. Around him, the devastation was complete. His garden, That small, green miracle that had cost him so much effort no longer existed. The plants had been uprooted, the leaves torn apart, the fruits lost. He fell to his knees, feeling the weight of despair bend his spine. How would he survive now? How would he face the coming days with nothing to sell, nothing to eat? For the first time in a long time, a tear escaped his eyes, drawing a clean path on his sand-covered face. It was then that something caught his eyes there. Amidst the ruins of what had been his garden, something shone with unusual intensity. John approached, curious, and brushed away the sand with trembling fingers. What he found made his heart skip a beat. A seed. But not a common seed. This one gleamed like liquid gold under the afternoon sun, emitting a glow that seemed to come from within it. It was the size of an almond, perfectly oval, as if it had been sculpted by divine hands. John picked it up carefully, feeling a pleasant warmth spread through his fingers upon contact with that mysterious object. Where had that seed come from? He had never seen anything like it in his entire life. Could it have been brought by the storm? Was it a gift from heaven or just another trial disguised as hope? Not knowing what to do with that unexpected treasure, John decided to seek advice from the wisest person he knew, the village elder, a man named Robert, whose eyes seemed to have witnessed the birth of stars. Robert's house was at the highest point of the village, as if it wanted to be closer to heaven. It was a simple but solid construction that had withstood countless storms over the decades. The elder was sitting on his wooden stool on the porch, as if he was already expecting visitors, when John arrived, breathless and still covered in sand. "I knew you would come, son," the old man said with a serene smile that revealed more gums than teeth. "The storm brought more than destruction, didn't it?" John stopped, surprised. How could the elder know? Without words, he extended his hand and showed the golden seed resting in his palm. Robert showed no surprise. His eyes, clouded by age but still sharp, gleamed with ancient knowledge. He took the seed with his wrinkled hands, which looked like the dry branches of a century-old tree, and closed his eyes. For long moments, he remained silent, as if listening to a voice only he could hear. When he finally reopened his eyes, a smile illuminated his aged face. "This is no ordinary seed, John. It is a divine gift sent especially for you." "For me? But why? I am just a farmer with nothing to offer." The elder returned the seed, placing it gently in John's hand and closing the young man's fingers around it, like someone entrusting a precious secret. "Sometimes, my son, heaven chooses the most unlikely vessels to pour out its most abundant blessings. Plant this seed with faith, water it with hope, and you will see wonders happen." Although a part of John remained skeptical. After all, how could a simple seed, no matter how extraordinary it seemed, change the course of his miserable existence? He decided to follow the elder's advice. What did he have to lose, after all? His garden was already destroyed, his plans ruined. That seed, whether it was magical or not, represented at least a new beginning. That very night, under the silent witness of the stars, John prepared a small bed in the center of what had been his garden. He worked carefully, removing stones and roots, softening the earth with his bare hands. When the soil was ready, he dug a small hole and, after a moment of hesitation, placed the golden seed there. He covered it with earth and, following an impulse he didn't even understand, knelt down and whispered, "I don't know if you are magical. I don't know if you come from heaven or if you are just another illusion. But if there truly is a purpose for your arrival, I ask that you grow and show your power. Not just for me, but for everyone who suffers in this land so afflicted." The days that followed were filled with anxious waiting. The entire village suffered. From the drought that had lasted for months, the wells began to dry up, the crops died, and despair grew like a weed in the hearts of the villagers. John visited his bed several times a day, looking for any sign that the seed was germinating. Nothing happened. A week passed. Hope, that fragile flower that John cultivated in his chest, began to wither. Perhaps the elder was mistaken. Perhaps that seed was just a curiosity of nature, beautiful but empty of purpose. It was then that, on the morning of the 8th day, upon visiting his bed at dawn, John saw something that made his heart stop. A small green sprout emerged from the dry earth. But it was not an ordinary sprout. Like the seed that originated it, it shone with a soft golden light, as if it captured the first rays of the sun and amplified them. John fell to his knees before that miracle, tears streaming freely down his face. There, in the midst of the earth parched by the drought where nothing else could grow, that little plant defied all the laws of nature. As the days passed, the plant grew at an impressive rate. In 2 weeks, it was already a bush with broad, shiny leaves whose light could be seen from a distance at night. In a month, it had become a small but robust tree, with branches that extended like welcoming arms, and a trunk that seemed made of polished gold. News of that wonder spread quickly. Villagers began to visit John's land, marveling at the plant that not only survived but thrived amidst the devastating drought. Some said it was a miracle. Others suspected witchcraft or a pact with dark forces. The young farmer, however, knew only that that plant was a gift, and as such, it should be shared. He realized that the tree's leaves, when dried and ground, produced a sweet-tasting tea with invigorating properties. He began to distribute it among the sick in the village, and to his surprise, many reported significant improvements, especially those suffering from stomach ailments. It was around this time that a traveling merchant, a man named David, passed through the village. He was a middle-aged man with shrewd eyes and a well-kept beard, dressed in fine clothes that betrayed his prosperity. Hearing rumors about the miraculous tree, he decided to investigate personally. When he arrived at John's land and saw that shining tree, his shrewd eyes immediately recognized an opportunity. He was not a superstitious man. He saw the world through the lens of trade and profit, but he knew how to recognize something valuable when he saw it. "Young man," he said to John, after observing how the villagers came looking for the miraculous leaves, "do you have any idea of the treasure you possess, this plant? I have never seen anything like it in my travels to distant lands." John, in his simplicity, merely shrugged. "It was a gift from heaven. It doesn't truly belong to me. I just cultivate it to help those in need." The merchant smiled. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. Noble sentiment. But know that these leaves you distribute for free are worth gold in the big cities. There are wealthy people and merchants who would pay fortunes for remedies for their stomach ailments. "Sell. I never thought of that," John confessed, scratching his head. "Well, you should. I offer you a considerable sum for the secret of this plant. Tell me how to cultivate it, and I will give you enough coins to build a stone house and never sleep in an old sack again." The temptation was great. John looked at his torn clothes, his calloused hands, his miserable shack. With the money offered by the merchant, he could finally have a decent life. But something in his heart prevented him from accepting. "I cannot sell what does not truly belong to me," he finally replied. "But perhaps we can find another way." And so an unlikely partnership was born. John would supply the seeds and leaves of the miraculous plant, while David would handle distribution in the big cities. The profits would be divided, and part of them would be used to help the village that suffered so much from the drought. As the months passed, the fame of the medicinal plant spread throughout the region. What began as a small business soon transformed into a prosperous undertaking. Neighboring landowners, who had previously hired John as a laborer, now offered their land for the cultivation of the miraculous plants in exchange for a share of the profits. However, John faced two major obstacles in his new journey. He could not read or write to document commercial agreements, and he lacked knowledge of negotiations and finance. His honesty and good character had brought him this far, but in the world of business, these qualities, while admirable, were not enough. It was at the market in the next town, where he went to sell part of his harvest, that John met Sophia, a young woman of serene beauty and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom in the world. She was the daughter of a once prosperous merchant, now bankrupt and ill. Despite her difficult situation, Sophia had received an education and knew how to read, write, and perform complex calculations. "I need work," she said to John, after observing him negotiate with difficulty with other merchants. I've seen how you struggle with numbers and agreements. I can help you with that, in exchange for a fair wage to support my sick father." John, who had never truly noticed his own limitations until that moment, felt his face burn with shame. But necessity spoke louder than pride. "I don't know if I can pay what you deserve," he replied honestly. Sophia smiled, a smile that illuminated her face like the first rays of morning illuminate a field of flowers. "Start by paying what you can. As the business grows, we can renegotiate." That meeting completely changed the course of John's business. Sophia not only recorded agreements and did the accounting, but also began teaching him letters and numbers in her free time. She was patient with his slowness in learning and never made him feel less because of his humble origins. At the same time, an old merchant named Thomas, a friend of the elder Robert, approached John, offering advice on negotiations. He was a man who had seen many moons and many tides of fortune rise and fall. His advice, born of experience rather than books, was like pearls to the young farmer. "Never make a deal when the sun is setting, my young friend," he would say with a mischievous twinkle in his eyes. "At the end of the day, the mind is tired and prone to accepting unfavorable terms. Or watch the hands of your interlocutor, not their eyes. Eyes can lie masterfully, but hands always betray nervousness and dishonesty." 6 months after finding the golden seed, John's life was unrecognizable. He no longer slept in an old grain sack, but in a comfortable bed inside a simple but solid house he had built with his own hands, helped by neighbors. His clothes, though still modest, were new and clean. His donkey Jasper now had the company of 2 sturdy horses, used to transport goods. More important than all of this, however, was the fact that John now employed 10 families from the village. In his plantations, which stretched for several acres, men and women who had previously barely been able to feed their children now worked with dignity and received fair wages. His greatest joy, however, was being able to help those in need. With part of the profits, he built water wells for the community, ensuring that thirst would no longer be a problem, even during the driest periods. He distributed food during times of scarcity and financed small projects that benefited everyone. Sophia became more than an employee. She was his confidante, his advisor, and although neither of them admitted it, a feeling was growing between them as delicate as the first sprouts of spring and as promising as an abundant harvest. Success, however, rarely comes without arousing the envy of those whose hearts are fertile ground for seeds of bitterness. Michael, the son of the regional administrator, an arrogant young man who had never had to work a day in his life, began to see John as a threat to his status and influence. Using his father's position, Michael began to create difficulties for John's business. Taxes were arbitrarily increased, licenses took months to be approved, and the transportation of goods was constantly obstructed by unnecessary inspections. "He wants to destroy us," Sophia lamented, after another shipment of medicinal plants was held up at the state border under absurd pretexts. "Not just us," John replied with a somber expression. "If our business fails, all the families we employ will return to misery." The situation reached a critical point when Michael announced a new tax exclusively on medicinal plants, a tax so high that it would make the business completely unviable. His anguish, John did something he hadn't done since planting the golden seed. He withdrew to the desert, alone in search of divine guidance. For 3 days and 3 nights he remained fasting, contemplating the stars and talking to the sky. When he returned, he surprised everyone with his serene appearance and the determined sparkle in his eyes. Instead of directly confronting the administrator and his son, as many expected, John did something completely unexpected. He organized a large party and invited all the important people in the region, including the administrator and Michael. "Have you lost your mind?" Sophia asked incredulously. "Inviting our enemies to a celebration?" John merely smiled, a smile that held secrets. "Sometimes the best way to disarm an enemy is to invite them to sit at our table." The party was held in the central village field, which John had decorated with flowers and torches. Abundant tables of food were set under a starry sky, and musicians played joyful melodies that invited dancing and celebration. The administrator and Michael arrived with suspicious expressions, clearly expecting some kind of trap. They were received by John with honor and courtesy, as if they were the most important guests of the night. During the banquet, when spirits were already high from wine and good food, John asked for everyone's attention and presented a surprising plan. Instead of fighting against the new taxes, he proposed to expand the cultivation of the medicinal plants even further, tripling the current production. With this, he explained, addressing the administrator directly, tax revenues will increase significantly, benefiting the entire region. Part of these taxes could be used to build a school and a medical care center, which would bear your excellency's name, of course. The administrator, a pragmatic man who valued power and recognition more than money itself, was visibly impressed by the proposal. The prospect of having his name associated with public works that would benefit the people and consequently increase his popularity was too tempting to refuse. Michael, realizing that his father was being seduced by the proposal, tried to intervene. "Don't trust this upstart farmer, father. He just wants to manipulate you." But the administrator, with a gesture, silenced his son. "Young John has just shown more vision and intelligence in 5 minutes than you have in your entire life, Michael. The proposal is excellent and benefits everyone. It is accepted." And so, against all expectations, the administrator became a valuable ally. Taxes were adjusted to a reasonable level, licenses were approved quickly, and the transportation of goods no longer faced obstacles. Michael, publicly humiliated by his own father, retreated into a resentful silence, but no longer represented a real threat. The expansion proposed by John was successfully implemented in the following months. The plantations now stretched as far as the eye could see, and more families found employment and dignity. The region's prosperity increased visibly, and with it John's fame as a visionary and benevolent leader. However, as often happens when material success grows rapidly, John began to distance himself from his spiritual roots. The prayers that had once marked the beginning and end of his days were gradually replaced by business meetings. The time he dedicated to visiting the sick and needy decreased gradually, consumed by the administration of his growing empire. 1 year after the first seed appeared, when everything seemed to be at the height of prosperity, a new crisis emerged, as unexpected as it was devastating. The plants began to wither without explanation. First, it was a few leaves that lost their golden sheen, then entire branches that dried up, and finally, complete trees that died in a matter of days. The agronomists and specialists hired by John could not explain the phenomenon. The soil was analyzed, the water tested, different cultivation techniques experimented with, all in vain. The death of the plants continued, relentless as a rising tide. Desperate, John walked through his plantations day and night, seeking to understand what was happening. It was during one of these walks, when the full moon illuminated the fields like a large silver eye observing the earth, that a revelation struck him like a lightning bolt. He had distanced himself from his spirituality, focusing only on business, profit, material growth. Remembering the elder's words when he had given him the golden seed, "Plant it with faith, and you will see wonders happen." John understood that perhaps faith was not only necessary for the initial planting, but for the continuous maintenance of that miracle. With a heavy heart, he returned to Robert's shack, the elder who had advised him at the beginning of his journey. He found him sitting on the same wooden stool on the porch, as if time had not passed, as if he had simply been waiting for this moment. "The plants are dying, Robert," John said without preamble, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "I've tried everything I could think of, but nothing works. I'm losing everything." The elder observed him in silence for long moments, his ancient eyes scrutinizing not only the man before him, but also the journey that had brought him there. "The plant reflects the heart of the one who cultivates it, John," he finally said, his voice as soft as the whisper of the wind among the leaves. "What has changed was not the earth, nor the water, nor the sun. What has changed was you." The words hit John like stones, each one striking a vulnerable point of his conscience. It was true. He had changed. The young man who slept in an old grain sack and shared his last piece of bread with the hungry had transformed into a businessman whose schedule rarely included time for compassion. "How can I fix this?" he asked. His voice choked with emotion and the painful recognition of his own transformation. The elder smiled, a smile that seemed to light up from within like the golden seed itself. "Return to your roots, son. Remember who you were and what truly matters. The rest will come naturally." That same night, John couldn't sleep. The elder's words echoed in his mind, mixing with images of his previous life. The simplicity, the faith, the genuine connection with the land and with people. When the first light of dawn began to paint the sky with rosy hues, he had already made his decision. In the following days, to the surprise and confusion of many, John implemented drastic changes. He redistributed a large part of his fortune among the needy, not only in his village but throughout the region. He founded a school for the children, where besides letters and numbers, the cultivation of the land and spiritual values were taught. He resumed the habit of visiting the sick and elderly, bringing not only remedies made from the leaves of his plants but also time and attention. He returned to working the land with his own hands, feeling once again the direct connection with the soil that nourished not only the plants but his own soul. Sophia observed these changes with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The John she had met at the market, determined but somewhat lost amidst numbers and agreements, was transforming into something more, something that seemed both simpler and deeper. "I don't understand," she confessed, as she helped him distribute food to needy families. "You are practically giving away the fortune you worked so hard to build. Aren't you afraid of returning to poverty?" John smiled, a smile that carried the serenity of someone who had finally found his true path. "True poverty, Sophia, is having hands full of gold and a heart empty of purpose. I am not abandoning the business, just remembering why I started it." And indeed, something extraordinary began to happen. As John reconnected with his essential values, the plants that had been withering began to flourish again. The golden glow returned to the leaves, and vitality spread through all the plantations like a wave of renewed light. The villagers, always prone to finding divine signs in everyday events, began to whisper that the plants responded to John's renewed spirit, that heaven, satisfied with his return to faith and generosity, was blessing his fields again. John neither confirmed nor denied these interpretations. For him, the lesson was clear. True prosperity could not be measured only in gold coins or acres of land. It was something deeper, a harmony between the material and the spiritual, between personal success and the common good. In the 15th month of his extraordinary journey, when his business had not only recovered but expanded under new principles, John faced his greatest challenge. A group of foreign merchants, hearing about the miraculous properties of his plants, arrived in the village with a tempting proposal. They offered a fortune, more money than John had ever imagined existed, for all his land and, more importantly, for the exclusive knowledge about the plants. The offer included a mansion in distant lands, servants to attend to his every whim, and a life of luxury until the end of his days. "Think carefully," said the leader of the merchants, a man in luxurious robes with a calculated smile. "Why settle for this provincial life when you can live like a prince? Your knowledge is worth much more than what you earn here." For 3 nights, John couldn't sleep. The temptation was great, almost irresistible. A part of him, the one that still remembered hunger and cold, the discomfort of sleeping in an old sack, wanted to accept the offer without a second thought. Who wouldn't desire a life of absolute comfort, free from material worries? On the 4th night, exhausted by indecision, he fell into a deep sleep and dreamed. In the dream, he saw himself again as the young farmer from before, sleeping rolled up in an old grain sack, feeling the cold wind entering through the cracks in the mud shack. But strangely, instead of discomfort, he felt a deep peace. In the dream, he woke up and went out to contemplate the stars, feeling part of something larger, connected to a purpose that transcended his small existence. When he woke up, bathed in the first light of morning, he had tears in his eyes and absolute certainty in his heart. His mission was not to accumulate wealth for himself, but to serve his community, to be a channel through which blessings could flow to many. That same morning, he met with the foreign merchants, who were already preparing to celebrate what they considered a sure deal. "I thank you for your generous offer," John said with surprising firmness in his voice, "but I must refuse it." The merchants exchanged incredulous glances. The leader, quickly composing himself, increased the offer, thinking it was just a negotiation strategy. John shook his head. "It is not a matter of price, gentlemen. It is a matter of purpose. The knowledge I possess does not belong exclusively to me. It belongs to this land, to these people. I cannot sell it as if it were a common commodity." "But it is a commodity," exclaimed one of the merchants, exasperated, "and extremely valuable." "To me it is a gift," John replied serenely, "and gifts should not be sold, but shared." Instead of accepting the foreigner's offer, John did something that left the entire village astonished. He announced that he would teach the cultivation of the plants to all interested villagers, freely sharing the knowledge he had previously guarded so carefully. "True wealth," he explained during an assembly in the central square, "is not in the knowledge we keep to ourselves, but in what we share with everyone. If every family cultivates these plants, our village will prosper like never before. And what is more important, this prosperity will not depend on a single man, but will be sustained by the entire community." In the following months, John transformed into a dedicated teacher. He organized learning groups, where he shared not only cultivation techniques but also the spiritual principles that, he believed, were essential for the success of that special undertaking. Sophia, who by this time had become not only his business partner, but also his life partner, was by his side every step of this new journey. Her knowledge of letters and numbers perfectly complemented John's practical skills, forming a partnership that inspired everyone around them. Upon completing 2 years since that dust storm that brought the golden seed, the lives of John and the entire village of Harmony Creek were unrecognizable. The previously simple farmer, who slept in an old grain sack and could barely feed himself, had become not only a man of means, but a respected and loved leader, whose influence extended far beyond the village boundaries. Even more impressive was the transformation of Harmony Creek. From a small, forgotten village, it had become a prosperous center of commerce and learning, attracting people from distant places. The school founded by John was now a renowned institution, where young people learned not only practical trades but also values such as generosity, faith, and perseverance. The golden fields, which had previously belonged exclusively to John, now stretched in all directions, cultivated by dozens of families who had learned the secrets of the miraculous plants. Prosperity, once concentrated, was now shared by the entire community. Visitors who arrived in Harmony Creek often asked John about the secret of his success. How had a simple farmer, without formal education or initial resources, managed to transform not only his own life, but an entire community? John would simply smile and point to the sky, saying, "I slept in an old sack until the day I understood that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in what we share. It was God who planted the seed of prosperity in me." And so his journey continued day after day, season after season, planting not only golden-leaved plants, but also hope, faith, and the knowledge that even the most devastating storms can bring with them seeds of transformation, waiting only for hands willing to plant them with faith and hearts open to harvest their fruits with gratitude. Sister, you who hear me now, perhaps you also carry your own old sacks, burdens of disappointments, of deferred dreams, of struggles that seem endless. Perhaps your field is barren, afflicted by storms that have carried away what you planted with such care. But remember, it is precisely at the moment when everything seems lost that the golden seed can appear, brought by winds you thought were only destructive. It may be hidden in the word of a friend, in the advice of a mentor, in a sudden inspiration born in the silence of prayer. True prosperity, as our farmer discovered, is not measured by material possessions, although these may come as a natural consequence of a life aligned with higher purposes. It is measured by the ability to receive blessings with humility and share them with generosity, creating a virtuous cycle that benefits not only oneself, but everyone around. And when temptation arises, because it surely will, disguised as an unmissable opportunity, a shortcut to happiness, remember John's dream where simplicity and clear purpose brought more peace than all the mansions and imaginable luxuries. Your golden seed already exists. Perhaps it is waiting for you to find it amidst the wreckage of some storm. Perhaps it is already in your hands, just waiting to be planted with faith and cultivated with perseverance. Or perhaps you yourself are the golden seed, destined to transform the lives of many around you. Regardless of where you are on your journey, know that the winds can change, the storms can pass, and fields that seem barren today can, tomorrow, shine with the gold of an abundant harvest. You just need to have faith, stay true to your essential values, and always remember that the most valuable of all harvests is the one that feeds not only the body, but also the soul.